And welcome to another episode of Neurodiversity with Theo Smith and my wonderful friends, the incredible people who come along every couple of weeks to share their insights, their stories, their narrative around neurodiversity, the concept, neuro-inclusion, what it means to them, how it impacts them, their lives, the work they do, their journey, the fascinating things people share. That actually, 4 years ago when I started this, people weren't really sharing those stories in business, in life. And we weren't really hearing the positive framing of neurodiversity and neuro-inclusion within our working world. So today, it is an absolute pleasure to invite somebody who is doing incredible work in the world of work and has been a great advocate and is always happy to talk and share and engage with the wider community. Tania Martin, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on. Why don't you just give people a little introduction to those who've not had the pleasure of meeting you or seeing you or hearing about the work that you do?
Excellent. Thank you, Theo. And the first thing I want to say is, how am I going to match your energy through this? Because you always have so much energy and I love it. So, so introduce myself. I am Tania Martin. I am the head of our Neurodiverse Centre of Excellence at EY. An incredibly unique role and title. And I have had the absolute privilege of working in the neurodiversity space within a big corporate over the last 2.5 years. I myself have ADHD, so I have lived experience of this. So I guess it's almost blurring the professional and the personal, merging them together and leading something that is really driving change across the organisation in the UK. So a very, very exciting place to be.
Amazing. And just to put that into context, organizations for the past, 8, 9, 10 years have focused on programs to include individuals who may be autistic as a prime example. This was driven by organizations like Specialisten in Europe into some of the big tech companies across the globe. However, I'd say one of the big challenges has been how to bring that into kind of business as usual, how to bring some of these autism programs to neuro-inclusive programs that are really stretching beyond the single line of perhaps those individuals who've not been able to get into work to individuals who are already in work as well, but absolutely do need help. And I'm just highlighting a little bit of the background there because from what I've seen and the work that you've been doing and the pleasure that I've had of seeing some of that firsthand is that you have started to shift the dial personally in terms of the work that you do and the work that EY's been doing to ensure that it is not just an autism program and that it is a pilot program that has legs to move beyond the pilot program, which has been really exciting, right? And I don't want to devalue anything else that's been done over the 8 to 10 years because all of that work helps us and there's been some good sharing to get to where we are today. And we really see, especially in the UK, seem to be shifting in a real quick positive direction from what I'm seeing. More to be done, but from some very big organizations, we're starting to see the fruits, I think, of some of that labour.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ask me what success looked like 2 years ago compared to what success looks like today, it is very different. And I think that just shows how quickly things have evolved in terms of our approach to neurodiversity. So the Neurodiverse Centres of Excellence are not a new concept for EY. They've been going for the last 8 years. They did start as an Autism at Work program in the US. And I think it was recognised by our global lead here in Shukla that actually to broaden them out to neurodiversity, there's obviously a lot of co-occurrence. We shouldn't rule people out who require that extended support in the workplace. And this is what the NCOEs have all been about. It's about extended support. But I think we in the UK only set up 2 years ago. And the thinking has definitely evolved. It's evolved from initially thinking, right, we're going to grow a number of these centres, to actually what has happened is we have taken the learning. So it wasn't a pilot. It was never a pilot, but it has been a place to pilot certain approaches to neurodiversity within the organisation. So my passion, and I talk about ripples a lot. So what are the ripples we're making elsewhere? Because you're absolutely right. There are two parts to this. There's the how do you break down the barriers to entry into an organisation for those who are neurodivergent, because people often get stuck at the recruitment process. But also, how do you help those that are hidden in plain sight within an organisation? So the dial has definitely shifted to that plain sight piece in terms of some of the ripples that we have made as a result of setting up our NCOE. The biggest place I think that I've actively been involved in is recruitment. How do we think differently about recruitment? How do we almost break the recruitment process a little bit to try and make it more inclusive? How do we change the narrative externally in terms of how we attract candidates? How do we ensure our job descriptions are written in a way that people engage with them and aren't put off applying to us? How do we make sure that the process is accessible as possible? How do you make adjustments as standard as opposed to something that you need to ask for? So it's been an incredibly exciting place for me to personally get involved in, working alongside our talent team in terms of testing some new ideas as to how we might do things differently. And those are slowly filtering down into to the broader recruitment process, so not just for our neurodiverse centres of excellence, but the business are definitely getting on board with Neuro-Inclusion and thinking differently about how we might approach things from a recruitment perspective.
Yeah, and there's something really fascinating I think happened in the last couple of years. I can't remember the exact point, but EY acquired what I would say some very incredible talent within the recruitment space as well, and built out a kind of a focus around talent acquisition, where it decided. I have not had the conversations with anybody to know what was going on behind the scenes, but more from what I was seeing was it acquired people who I respected within the industry because I've been involved in that community, and it seemed to go out and hire some of the best, most prominent individuals at a senior level to cover several different areas of its talent acquisition strategy and business and functions. And it sounds like at a similar time, the Neurodiversity Centre of Excellence, right? It was almost like this big drive to say, talent acquisition for us has just shifted to be a major priority, and we're going to invest big. And in the UK specifically, I'm talking about, because this is where I saw the shift. And that was really exciting to see. It was exciting to see prominent individuals who I had a lot of respect for getting really prominent positions within a leading organisation, but also bringing them together across these different areas of like senior hires, grad recruitment, the overall strategy, Neurodiversity Centre of Excellence. So just I'm more noting that for individuals, say something happened at a period of time where we're now probably seeing a lot of that work come to fruition, or go to the next phase of development and growth and change and transformation, which is exciting to see.
Absolutely. And I think, so Sam Ramsey, our head of experienced hire, who I think you alluded to just there, her and I had a fantastic conversation where I went to her and I said, this is what I've seen. This is how we might want to think about doing this differently. I said about ripping up the rule book in terms of how we approach recruitment. And she sat there and she said, well, basically what you're asking me for is an anti-recruitment process. I know that phase is stuck in my head because I was like, yeah, I love that. And she was absolutely on board in terms of trying it, which in itself is incredibly refreshing, particularly for a large organisation like EY, where change can sometimes be quite slow. And innovation like that, being given the opportunity to test something, to pilot something, to see what works, was a real, as I say, a real privilege to be able to work with her and her team on this, and drive forward some change. And what was even more, I think for me and for Jem, who also worked on the project, what was really validating is we won a couple of RAD awards for the work that we did. So it wasn't just internal, it was recognised externally that actually we were doing something different. And that external validation was a really nice pat on the back for the innovative thinking that we were doing as an organisation in this space.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned Jeremy there as well. And you get in the team that are fully committed to making, real sustainable change. People who have real passion about the topic and have done way before this came about. From all the conversations I have with incredible individuals at these events, you can see it. And when you bring these people together, that's where you start to see the impact of change, and where organizations commit to employing very specific individuals that have a mission. They're mission driven, based on inclusivity and neuro-inclusion. I think is really important. So let's just take it back then, and we'll get back to some of the actual specifics around the work and what happened, and kind of where we're up to, and some of the positives, and maybe what came out of assessing for the awards, what it is we did, what did we achieve, and what are the next steps, because I think that'll be interesting for the audience. But Tania, tell us a little bit about you, right? Where did life start for Tania? Before all this time at EY and some really prominent, important roles, time in recruitment, began at Michael Page for a short while, I think, and a degree. Was it psychology?
I did a
or in that
psychology degree.
So give us some insight into who Tania is from a personal perspective, and maybe your journey to understanding your wonderful brain, and where some of the challenges, opportunities, and strengths were, and how you've then given the value that you've given to EY and the neurodiversity community.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me laugh. I obviously jumped straight into my passion, which is how can I change the world, or fix corporate in this space. So as I mentioned, I got an ADHD diagnosis. I've got an ADHD diagnosis myself, and it was a bit of a journey getting that. And actually, as I look back on my career, I can see how it has impacted my career. In terms of the jobs that I've done. So I've been with EY for 10 years this year, and I've been in the NCOE for the last 2.5 years. And prior to that, I was involved in a number of different projects. And if I look back now, I can absolutely see my ADHD brain in action. So not only do I get bored really quickly, so I might have been with EY for 10 years, but I've done multiple jobs throughout that time. But what always interests me is process improvement. So looking at something, understanding how it works, not going into a huge amount of detail. I like enough detail so I understand it, pulling it apart and then putting it back together in terms of making some recommendations going forward. And if I look back over the jobs that I've done at EY over the last 10 years or so, a lot of them fall into that bucket. But they're all new things. So I've done everything from organisational design to offshoring strategy to managing our revenue planning process to SAP implementations. So real broadness in terms of what I've picked up. And for me, my brain loves a new challenge. It likes to be learning, and I think it was recognised, and the people I work for recognised that when I started to get bored, they needed to direct me somewhere else, and then I'll just pick it up and run with it. So from that perspective, I've been incredibly fortunate to have a successful career where I am, and the variety that I need to stay. From a diagnosis perspective, I think the reason why I joined the NCOE is because despite my success at EY, I've always had this feeling of not quite fitting, not quite being able to keep up. And that's not true. I've been an exceptional performer for multiple years. But there was something about me that just felt like I didn't quite fit. So I've always had this real passion around people and just making them or helping them feel like they belong or they've got a safe space to talk. The whole way through COVID, I ran a meeting for a number of my team where I'd bring them onto a call every Thursday morning, and we'd literally just sit there and what's good, what's bad, personal, professional, let's just talk about these things. So I've always had this draw to wanting to help make people feel safe at work, and give them that safe space to just really share everything about themselves as opposed to just this professional front that sometimes can be expected. So I had this draw to join the NCOE. I didn't have my ADHD diagnosis at that point in time. And typical Tania, I was like, all right, this is a new space for me. I better learn about it. So I stuck myself on a course. And as I was doing it, I was like, oh my goodness me, I tick quite a lot of these boxes. So I actually sent a list of traits to my ex-husband without any heading on it, and I said, have a read of this. And he read it and he went, well, that's you on a piece of paper. And I was like, I know. Wow. And because of the role I was in and the people I was talking to, I felt like I had to know one way or the other. So I sought a diagnosis pretty quickly. I know that's incredibly privileged of me to be able to do that. But I was like, I can't stand up in this space, talk about this, have a team that are neurodivergent and not know myself. So I was really keen to do that. I think looking back, if I look at the fact that I jumped around quite a lot in my career, it's been very squiggly. I've never really settled on one thing. I'm a generalist through and through in terms of previous roles. If I look back at school, I was bright, so I got missed in terms of picking up this diagnosis. If I look back at my A-level reports, it was very obvious now reading them. When I got to that point in my education where I had to plan things, I had to organise things, I had to meet deadlines, all of that, couldn't do it. It came out really, really strongly in my A-levels, and I messed my A-levels up, and it stuck with me in my whole entire career. It's like I've always been trying to prove that I'm better than my A-level results because, as I said, I was a bright child and I should have done better than I did. But as a female, and this happens quite a lot, I have struggled my whole life, but I've struggled with anxiety and depression. So at the age of 13, I was hospitalised with anxiety and depression. And actually, there's a huge co-occurrence between mental health and ADHD. And I think often I thought, right, I can fix that, I'll fix it. And then it kept coming back, And I was just stuck in this constant cycle of, right, here it is again. I don't know why I can't deal with this. Or why can I not get myself out of this? So whilst the success is there and I've been driven and I've absolutely pushed myself and I've done really well, it has come at a personal cost. I have burnt out numerous times. I have fallen over numerous times with just complete overwhelm with life. And for me, the ADHD diagnosis was that final piece of the puzzle. It provided the explanation as to why I struggled, why I find certain situations difficult, why I find it really hard to say no, why I find organisation and planning really challenging, and it means that I used to extend my work hours in order to try and keep up. So it has been, I think, life changing. It has been life changing, and I don't want to say that in a really cliched way, but it has for me. It's made the difference between struggling and actually going, I understand myself better now. I understand how my brain works, and I understand that, do you know what, there's some things that you're not going to train me out of. I simply am never going to be able to do them very well. But what that doesn't take away from me is all the things I do excel at, and focusing on the things that I love to do. I do great things when I'm focused on those things.
That's brilliant.
That was a
And
very long explanation there, Theo.
no, it's good. It's a good explanation, and I like the journey. And I think what's really important to highlight there is individuals can make assumptions that, you know, you work for EY for 10 years, you're in a prominent role, you have done some fascinating things. It's probably one of the big respected organizations in the world for the work that it does, for its prominence, for its level of visibility at the top of organizations. And therefore people can make the assumption that therefore there is no challenge for you. Do you understand what I mean? That there is no barrier for you. That where does the anxiety and the stress and the but in actual fact, what you talked about there was this has existed from a very early age as a young person, and from a number of reasons you've found maybe coping mechanisms that may not have been positive for your mental health and well-being. So just because you find the coping mechanism doesn't mean it's a good one, right? It could be a distraction from dealing with the problem at hand, and therefore you don't think about it as much. But like you said, you keep falling down and you can't quite figure out why you keep falling down. Well, it's because, for example, you might, use drink, or you might use eating, or you might use lack of exercise or staying in bed. Well, there's so many different things that you can use to block out the noise, the stress, the anxiety, and then dealing with the problem. And I think it's exactly that thing that we miss. That is the understanding of what is going on, emotionally, neurologically, environmentally. And when you start to understand those things, that is, and you say, life changing, life affirming. So the diagnosis in that instance has provided you with the a bit of, I don't know, maybe it, and you tell me, right? I'm kind of thinking this through from all the conversations that we've had. Maybe it means that you're a bit easier on yourself, and love yourself a bit more. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because what was really interesting when I got my diagnosis, I thought it was going to be the silver bullet and I just fixed my brain and I was now going to get medication and I was going to be absolutely fine and life was going to be rosy. It wasn't like that. So what I think the first thing I did was I used it as a bit of like, hey, all of you people that have given me a hard time. So my family, my poor husband, all of those people. Right, you now need to give me a break, because this is the reason why I sometimes behave the way I behave, and therefore you should be kinder to me as a result. So at first it was very much about that external, right, you need to understand me better, which is quite an interesting way. Now I reflect back on it, that is where my brain went. So I spent a lot of time trying to explain to people why my brain worked the way it worked, in a period of time where I was also trying to understand, how does my brain work? And I always remember, and a lot of people that are late diagnosed, I've had conversations with them, when you tell work, and I did disclose at work, obviously, you sometimes get asked, well, what do you need? And I'm like, absolutely no idea. Like, literally no idea. I have been masking this for years. I have no idea how to unpack this and cope with this. You need to give me time to figure that out. So there was definitely at the start that external, right, be nicer to me. But as it's gone on, I've had a lot of coaching and therapy around it, and I think that's really important to try and get your head into a space, understand it a bit better. And somebody very wise said to me, you do realise that you're not going to fix this. And that was a really hard lesson for me, because that's what I do. I fix things. Process improvement is my passion. That's what I do for a living. And I think I've spent my whole life trying to fix me out of the way I've felt. And when I finally accepted that, and it took a little while, it wasn't quick, I started to just be kinder to me. I started to just go, do you know what? Yeah, I haven't exercised 3 times this week, but I'm not very good at consistency. But next week I'll probably exercise 5 times. And that's okay. And just being okay with that sort of stuff it just makes life just feel a little bit easier. I stop beating myself up as much as I used to.
I think it's interesting the cycle that you go through, and I think everybody will have their own cycle of what they need to go through. And we talk about it. It might be at first. Some people I know, talking with my cousin in a past episode, I think he went through a lot of like anger, lost opportunities and breakdown of relationships and his marriage and all these things that there's some anger there that needed to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And for other people, it's maybe immediate acceptance and validation, but there's still like a journey. It's like any curve of transformation, right? Some people can go through it really quickly, and other people, it will take them many, many, many years because of some of the trauma or some of the loss. And I think it's really important to understand that, and not to say to any person that like this is the time frame that you need to move through this period. It's like, because it will be different for every single person.
Yeah. And what I believe about it today might be different to what I believe about it tomorrow, because it is a journey. And I think that's one of the things from a neuro-inclusion perspective in an organisation is that ability to sit, listen, understand, and know that each person is an individual, and that those adjustments or that support that you put in place one day might look very different in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, and being able to keep that conversation going. So I think you're absolutely right. It does feel very different for every single person. And I think late diagnosed, and there's lots of females are getting late diagnosed at the moment, you have to get to a period of acceptance, but it can be quite traumatic to get there. It is. It's hard. It's not like, yay, I now understand myself. It's like, oh my goodness me. There's regret. There is anger. There is a disappointment. There is what might I have done differently had I known. So it's there.
I think there's a lot of trauma caught up with it, isn't it? And I didn't connect it with trauma always until the way that specialists, cleverer people than me in this space of the human mind, were connecting the trauma, the triggers, the things that you didn't even realise had such an effect to you, and therefore you would just. I think the masking I find interesting as well. Sometimes I would maybe call it. Maybe this is just a me thing or a masculine thing. I don't know, but it's lying to yourself, right? So less masking, more like I don't feel sad, or I don't get emotional, or I don't do that. And really, you just put in layers of these lies to yourself that you don't, so that you don't have to think about it or cope with it or deal with it. So then, from a mask perspective, I think it's a thicker, heavier, deeper mask. you're not even aware the mask is there. It's so thick that you couldn't even remove it if you wanted to in that moment. And therefore, these layers of the mask that need to come off also has an impact. And as you take some of them off, there's some pain that exists within that, because you take it off and there's vulnerability that you've not let out before, that all of a sudden you have to deal with that vulnerability. And from a human perspective, I find that quite a difficult part of the journey, to both still maintain positivity, supporting others, trying to make a difference, but also at the same time yourself thinking, right, there's some stuff that you've not dealt with that you now have to deal with if you want to be able to progress forwards and support others. But
sorry, I just briefly on that, I was going to say, I think this whole bring your whole self to work narrative is sometimes a little bit unhelpful, particularly for those that mask, because that suggests that you can take the whole mask off, and actually that unmasking process is difficult. As you've just said, it's like it's layered, and sometimes maybe even I don't know what's at the bottom of those layers, because I have lived with the mask on for so long. But working in this space with neurodivergent individuals, I know that people find it difficult to trust, to be vulnerable. And I think, yes, absolutely, feel supported, feel like you can trust, feel like you can start to take the mask off. But the expectation is you don't have to take it all off all at once if you're not comfortable doing so. So this whole bring your whole self to work piece, sometimes for those who are neurodivergent, can be quite conflicting. So yeah, I just wanted to add that based on my own experience working with neurodivergent people in this space.
Well, I think this is a wonderful segue through to, I guess, the next part of the conversation, which is, when you think about this Centre of Excellence and when you took this role on, right through to winning the award, take us through the journey. What was the initial idea and concept? What was the involvement? What did you focus on? And what is it in the end that you had that you were able to present as the concept that won the award? So let's start breaking it down from the beginning and take it through the steps. And we don't need to go too deep into the detail, but just so that people listening can understand where you were bringing your lived experience and the lived experience of members of the team to be able to break down some of the barriers that existed. And just to highlight for people, organizations are complex, right? As is the education system, as is the political system. So I'm just going to say that breaking down barriers, cutting through red tape is very, very difficult indeed. So we're never going to achieve everything that we want through a process like this. The whole point is to identify where there is opportunities, where you can make changes and adaptations, where you can help, and where there are barriers, you let individuals coming through know that potentially there may be a barrier. And I know that's been really important to the work that you've been doing, to ensure that you can do the best that you can within the confines of what you have, and then iterate and then try and inform the business on how you can make improvements. That is my recruitment hat on, of trying to help the wider world understand. What they don't see is these very, very busy, hard-working recruiters behind the scenes working with not always everything that they would like to have as a tool to be able to achieve what they need to. We sometimes have to build the plane in flight, which is quite complex. So that's just my recruiter's hat to the rest of the world before you get started, Tania.
No worries. So the Neurodiverse Centre of Excellence model, as I said, they started out in the US, and they have developed what is basically a skills-based assessment process. But so initially, in terms of building the first team in Manchester, we worked very closely with our US colleagues. So for me, it was all about being a sponge, It was picking apart their process, trying to understand it, trying to apply it to the UK market. And there's, I guess, 3 key stages. There's the candidate attraction. So what we do differently in that space is we don't put these jobs on the standard platforms that you would think of. So Total Jobs, Indeed, LinkedIn are usually the things that people come up with. But we spent a lot of time building an external ecosystem of charities, of organisations, of universities, particularly DEI parts of universities, to try and identify candidates for these roles. So the narrative was very much around, I'm not looking for the person who would naturally apply for EY. I was seeking those people that wouldn't be. So the NCOE was all about those that were underemployed or unemployed. How do we attract them to us as an organisation? So the candidate attraction piece was key. We then job descriptions, we tweaked, the US helped us with that, and then we went through this 4-stage assessment process. And what was really interesting is everybody that applied got an interview. And that interview was incredibly informal. It wasn't competency based. It was purely about getting the person comfortable to talk a bit about why they wanted the role and to apply for the role in the first place. The things that we were testing were technical expertise. Ultimately, that's what we were looking for, is not how technical are you right now, but how can you potentially learn around technology. So if you think about technology as a whole, it's changing all of the time. I'm looking for the person that's quite comfortable that the technology is going to change, and how are they potentially going to solve that problem when it is changing. But also those that love to just dive into code, that might spend a lot of their time doing that, but might not be doing it for an organisation at that stage. So the recruitment process, as I said, there are 4 stages, but the first 3 parts of that were the first stage, and that the first 3 parts were you couldn't get declined in the first 3 parts. So you'd have a conversation with me or one of my team. We'd then ask you to do a technical test, which was a self do at home. It was based on, as I said, how have they approached the problem as opposed to getting it completely right. That was really important. And then the follow-up was a conversation about exactly that. How have you approached it, and how did you find it? How did that feel in terms of you being put in a situation where you might not necessarily understood the technology? Post that, they were then invited to something called Super Week, which is what the US has built. And this is it used to be 5 days, it's now 3, but it's a work simulation. And it's online, so it's accessible from that perspective. You don't need to go to a physical office. And it is all about us getting to know the individuals, but them getting to know us as well. And we were really clear in our messaging the whole way through. It's like, this has to be right for you. And the one thing I do say to anybody, and I get quite a lot of people that drop into my inbox asking, do I disclose? It's like, well, if the organisation isn't willing to support you now, they're probably not going to be willing to support you once you actually join. So creating that psychological safety up front was really important to us. So through that work simulation, we did that. And that was all a combination of technical and some exercises where we put people into small groups, and we saw how they engaged with problem solving. And for me, it was all about looking at how are they engaging? Is that engagement verbal? Are they writing in the chat? Because that's just as valuable. And just looking and hearing and reading the ideas that those individuals had. And at the end of that, we then made offers. So of that first Super Week, we had 10 people come through, and we made offers to 7 of them. So it's a really powerful process. What I then did around recruitment was because I was learning from the US. I was like, okay, this is great in terms of a skills-based process, in terms of a skills-based assessment process, but what was missing? And sometimes some of the language used in the emails were quite long. I was like, is this as accessible as it can be? So I got together the technologists that joined us, a few of us, and I sat down and I said, right, they used to hate seeing my name in their inbox because usually I wanted them to give me feedback. I'm constantly saying, right, tell me, does this work? Does this work? That's the way I work, is like, I need you to tell me what's broken because then I can fix it. So I got this group of us together, and we had, it must have been about 2 hours in Manchester. It wasn't supposed to be 2 hours. We went into massive hyper focus, and we literally sat there and went, that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work. And we just pulled it apart. And it was a really good way for us to go, right, how can we do this differently? That's what I took to Sam Ramsey and team. It was like, right, we have some ideas. We want to try some things, and I would like you to potentially help us do that, which they got on board with. What changed? I think there's a number of things. We brought in some tech. So we implemented a system called Beamery that helped us communicate in a much more structured way, that gave us the opportunity to keep candidates up to date throughout the process. So one of the things we know around recruiting with people who are neurodivergent is that you have to be really clear on your timescales. So if you're going to say you're going to do something, you need to do it, because if you don't do it by that timescale, it potentially causes anxiety and stress for that individual. And even that, and this shouldn't be the case, but even that from a recruitment perspective is not always consistently applied. I know the amount of times I've potentially heard that if you've gone for a job interview, you're not getting feedback quick enough, or you're not getting what's the next stage? How long am I going to have to wait to hear to the next stage? It's not great. And particularly if you're neurodivergent, that is incredibly stressful. So we were very clear on the timescales. Not only were we very clear on the timescales, we told people what those timescales were. So we laid it out in a way that these are the different stages that you need to go through. And this is how long it will take before you hear from us. And we stuck to it. So we made sure we were doing that. And the technology definitely helped us with that. We then thought about how people are receiving information. So I had somebody in the team who was super dyslexic. That's how he described himself. And he said to me, getting really lengthy emails is just not good for his brain. So we took a step back and we were like, right, maybe what we can do is we can provide this information in multiple formats. So every single bit of communication that went out, people had the option to choose as to how they received that information. So do they want it in video? Do they want it as an audio clip? Do they want it as a lengthy email? Or would they like it as an infographic? And I know how my brain works. Infographics are great. See a process, brilliant. So we produced all of that information into multiple formats to be able to send that out to people. The other thing worth mentioning is the language and how this was positioned externally to candidates. So very quickly we realised that actually that psychological safety piece is super important, and you need to start doing that from the moment that person applies to a role or even sees the job advertisement or the job spec, starting to build that psychological safety. So what we did is we included throughout the process that they went through videos from the team, videos from me, re-emphasizing all of the time, if you need any support, just let us know what you need and we will try and accommodate that for you. We shared stories, we shared vulnerabilities. I told them about my own diagnosis. So you could instantly start to build this sense of, I'm joining a group of people that genuinely understand this and want to help me. And I think that's really important. We also did things like, I don't care if you're wearing a hoodie to the interview, because I know sometimes feeling comfortable is more important than putting a shirt on. I don't care if you've got blue hair and you have tattoos, because none of those things matter as to whether or not you can do that job. So it was about saying, please be comfortable with who you are, because we want you to be in an environment where you can show your absolute best self without having to worry about an itchy label or covering something up because you're worried about being judged. But equally, I don't care if you don't make eye contact. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you pause partway through an interview because you need to collect your thoughts. I will give you the space to be able to pause. If you need me to repeat a question, I'll repeat the question. In fact, I'll give you the interview questions up front if that makes this easier for you. So it really was around how do you soften the process, and how do you take away as much of the anxiety as possible that means that people can genuinely turn up and be their best selves throughout on the day through the process. And I had every single thing we did, we tested with the team. So none of this was that every idea was pulled apart, agreed with, said it was a good idea, said it was a bad idea. If something was a bad idea, we had a potential video that we were making. People didn't like it, we scrapped it. It was really important that the community that this was going to impact were on board with what we're doing. So everything was tested. So I think that's probably it in a nutshell from a recruitment perspective. It's not none of this is rocket science. It's just about asking the questions and thinking differently. Some of it really is pushing the boundaries in terms of how we've been taught to recruit. I started in recruitment, as you pointed out. I still remember that eye contact and being clear and concise were two of the competencies that I was absolutely hammered into me when I was trained as to look out for. And I think if we
a good handshake.
And a firm handshake, yeah. And if we truly want to be neuro-inclusive, we need to start thinking differently about this stuff.
Absolutely. And what would you say after all of those experiences? Clearly, it went well. There was a lot of learnings from it. What would you say are the most significant things that you learned from the process that maybe would inform, what you did next time? Where are the opportunities do you see for improvements in the future? Or maybe any of the other barriers that other individuals, organizations can consider that they may come up against that may save them some time and energy from your experience?
The number one is getting the job description right. I think it was interesting talking to my super dyslexic colleague. He said all I was interested in was the title of the job, what the job was, and how much it was going to pay me. He said, and if you think about job descriptions, they are just full of fluff. They genuinely are just, I read them sometimes. I'm like, the first section about the organisation, it's just all in corporate speak. It's not accessible at all. So trying to think differently about job descriptions. How do you present the most important information first, but also people who are neurodivergent, if they don't tick every box, they won't apply. So change the language. Change the language to, I want you to be able to do 4 of the below, as opposed to all of the below. Or change the language around, these are some of the skills you might need to demonstrate in this role, but we understand you might need support with some of these skills. You don't need to do all of them perfectly. Stop using things like a great team player. I don't know what that means. How do you demonstrate that? I think there are really simple things, and it's just about thinking about it differently. And I think for people that are genuinely keen to do something different in the neuro-inclusion space, there are lots of different steps. But if you can start with your job description and you can make that more accessible, don't just write, if you want adjustments, please contact me at the bottom as your token tick box exercise. Really start to think about things differently. And then there's multiple steps after that. But I think if I was saying to anybody, if there's one place to start, that is a really good place to start.
Brilliant. And I know that you've done a lot of work on the content and the accessibility and the variety. Interestingly, through work that I've done with other organizations, even this is just to be mindful of, even if you get the job description right, you might even get the advert right and they're brilliant. If you then inadvertently pick an image that does not show what you're trying to explain in the right light, you can do away with all of that. So you made a good point, and this is more I know you've done great work in this, but it's more when I've seen others try this and then like forget about the small little detail of the image that they put on a social media post, for example, where they use a great place to work or something, and the image of the person in the video is stuck at somebody not looking very happy, as just a really basic example. So you might write stuff, you might write a great job advert, a great job description, but then you put it in a community, let's say for parents of ND kids, right? Because you want to attract some of those individuals, because you know of the additional challenges they go through. So they're resilient, they can advocate for themselves and their children. There's loads of skills in there that you really do want. And you've even thought about adapting working hours and everything. You've done it all, right? You're amazing. But then you go and put that image in there of somebody that looks like they're not very happy at all, just because they've inadvertently caught at a funny moment in the video. And then the description, or whatever it is. So I think sometimes you go to all these efforts and it's the really simple thing around how you present that content, who you choose. So your partners of who you choose matters. Because if they don't understand the context of what you're talking about, and you and your team have done incredible work, which you did, to really understand what's important, and then you partner with a social media team that don't get it, right? And then all of a sudden, I'm going off a bit here, but it's because from what I've seen over the years now of getting involved in this space, is that there is now some really good work, and it can be undone by the simplest of little things, because you forget about the minutiae of detail around the content and how you get it out there and where it goes. And that just popped into my mind as an immediate.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I unfortunately was the face of a lot of what we did, and there were so many pictures of me all over LinkedIn that it actually started to freak me out a little bit. Most of them I think I was caught in an okay looking friendly enough, but it's a really good point. Very, very good point, well made. It's the small details that you might miss that it makes a real difference to somebody.
Yeah, and that is the level of sensitivity from individuals based on their background and experience. Also, the thinking about, is this going to be the same as what I've experienced before? And we know this, right? We know this from the amount of D&I leaders that appeared after Black Lives Matters, and then the amount of D&I leaders who've disappeared again in prominent positions in organizations. The amount of individuals who are ND who've been marginalised, stigmatised, faced barriers, ended up in organisations where it's been really difficult for them. I think there's a lot of from the community, from us, hypersensitivity around what's now being portrayed. Even the post the other day around ADHD technology and support, right? Like all of a sudden overnight, there's like everything has a tag of ADHD on it. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Because it's
yeah,
so I think all these things are really important, and that's where we can learn from the level of energy and effort and the very attention to detail. And I think also what you mentioned there, which is the constant learning. So we did this, actually, it didn't work. We now know why it's not working, and we're now going to change it.
yes,
And I know from speaking with you and the team and others involved that there was a lot of that going on, constantly
yeah,
iterating, making adaptations, changes, considerations, understanding that you've not got it perfect, but
yeah,
you want to get it right consistently. And you're embedded in the process to get it right. Whereas, unfortunately, and this is a problem we've got to solve in recruitment, I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of firefighting that's going on that when
mm,
we try to solve something, we may give it a go, but then we quickly are pulled away from it to focus on other stuff. So you have people with lived experience, with passion, with energy, but
yeah,
the overall budget investment is not there to get consistency. So that again is what I've seen.
yeah.
The having the centre of excellence, having you and others involved to focus in and on a period of time to go, no, we're going to stay with this and see it through. I think from an external perspective, has made a difference.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. The Ripple, so graduate recruitment, we've spent some time talking to them, and they've put in place a neurodiversity champion within graduate recruitment now. They have asked me to come in and look at certain things for them. So having that, it's not the most important thing for me is I don't want it to just be me that understands this stuff. I want to educate people. I want people to learn. I want people to start thinking this way because we can make a much bigger impact that way rather than it just being one person that holds all of the knowledge. So going in, understanding how they do something, providing recommendations, but more importantly, others getting it and then starting to apply it is super important. We make a much bigger impact much quicker if we do it that way.
Brilliant. So on that nice reflection, then, any somebody else who's now going on this journey, and maybe they might not have the resources or the overall focus, but they might be given the role and responsibility to start something to get going in their
Mm-hmm.
own organisation. What would be your any advice, key tips, thoughts that you may provide to them as they begin this journey?
Um, Come and find me on LinkedIn. We talk about this all the time. I post a lot about recruitment. So yeah, absolutely, please do that. We do talk to our clients about what we do. So we're often having conversations. Sam and myself are out talking to a number of organisations who are very interested in this area. So yeah, very happy to chat to you. But equally, I think what the NCOE has done has been, as I said, somewhere to pilot things. So start small. Don't try and fix all of it all at once. Take maybe one part of the recruitment process and think about it for one specific business area and try something, test it, see if it works, and then roll it out. I think you have a much bigger impact that way than trying to do all of it at once, or yeah, trying to do the whole organisation at once. So just I'd start small, test it, pilot it, and then make a bigger impact as a result of the learnings that you get from that first piece.
Yeah, brilliant. And then that gives you the opportunity, and I think that's where then the commitment comes in to go, this is something that we're trialing and we are going to take it then to the next level. That commitment to what the next stage looks like phase, not break it down in because you will know, right? You need the learnings and the data and the insights, but to
Yeah,
know next we want to take it to a different region, a different business group, or
yes,
um, but to start where the energy is, I've always found very powerful. Start where people have the energy to really take this on board, because
yeah,
it isn't easy, right? But
no,
it is impactful, and I
yeah,
think that is the real difference. Both impactful on a business performance perspective, but if we think around our responsibilities to the planet, to the rest of the humans who exist on this planet, I think we've got a social responsibility.
Yeah.
And I truly believe the future of the planet is going to depend on neuro-inclusion, that we ensure that we give access to opportunity to make a positive difference to all thinking types, because if we don't, I think that's where we become at risk. So well done. Thank you for the work that you do, Tania. And a real pleasure to have you on. And yes, if they go and find you, Tania Martin, on LinkedIn, best platform, anywhere else people can reach out to you, or anything else you'd like to share as we bring this to a close?
No, thank you just so much for having me. It's a really important conversation, so very pleased to be having it.
Brilliant. Real pleasure. Thank you again. And yeah, please do reach out to Tania if you have any questions or you want to connect.